So why did this super charming guy suddenly end up going crazy and murdering a bunch of people? Well, his name's Somkid, but we'll call him Kid. And here's the thing, I saw it all happen. Or at least I saw enough to know how someone so likable could turn into something so evil. It started in 2005 when I was just a teenager working part-time at one of those fancy hotels in Bangkok, where rich tourists stayed. That's where I first met Kid. He wasn't hard to notice. He had this way about him, like he owned the room without even trying, dressed sharp, always smiling, and talking smooth as silk. Everyone liked him instantly, even me. One day he checked into our hotel and I remember thinking, this guy must be important. But what I didn't know then was that he wasn't there for business or pleasure. He was there to hunt. Later that night, after my shift ended, I heard some commotion coming from upstairs. People were whispering about a dead woman found in one of the rooms, room 312, to be exact. The police came, and they questioned everyone who worked there. They showed us pictures of the victim, a beautiful singer named Lek. She looked familiar, like someone I might have seen on TV once, but what stuck with me most was the security footage they played during their investigation. It showed Kid walking confidently through the lobby earlier that evening, chatting with Lek like they were old friends. You wouldn't think anything bad had happened if you only watched that clip. But by the next morning, her body was discovered in the bathtub, tied up and drowned. When the cops asked around, no one knew much about Kid except that he'd booked the room under his real name. Turns out thousands of people in Thailand share that same name, which made finding him nearly impossible. So he disappeared, leaving behind nothing but questions. Fast forward 5 months, and another body turned up. This time, it was a masseuse from a nearby parlor. Her name was Nong, and she'd been strangled in yet another hotel room. Again, there were whispers about a man seen with her, a man matching Kid's description. Still, no one connected the dots until a third woman died weeks later. By then, the pattern became clear. Different cities, different victims, but always the same MO. The police finally got serious. They released sketches and grainy photos taken from hotel cameras. One image stood out, a blurry shot of Kid checking into a hotel, his face half hidden behind sunglasses. Even though it wasn't perfect, it gave people an idea of what to look for. And that's when things got personal for me. See, around this time, my older sister Mai started dating someone new. His name was Somkid. Yes, the Somkid. At first, I thought it was just coincidence. My sister described him as charming, generous, and fun to be around. Everything sounded normal. Too normal, actually. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Then one night, Mai invited him over for dinner. As soon as he walked in, my stomach dropped. There was no mistaking it. It was the same guy from the news, the same face in the sketch. I tried to stay calm, pretending everything was fine while secretly panicking inside. After dinner, Mai stepped out to grab dessert, leaving me alone with him. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair, "you're Mai's little brother, huh?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, nice to meet you." He chuckled, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Nice to meet you too. You seem quiet. Is everything okay?" I hesitated, unsure of what to say. Should I confront him right there, call the cops, or play along and gather more evidence? Before I could decide, Mai returned, carrying bags filled with sweets. The moment passed, but the tension lingered. Over the next few weeks, I kept my distance, watching carefully whenever Kid visited. He acted perfectly normal, laughing and joking with Mai like any other boyfriend. but every now and then I'd catch him staring off into space, his expression dark and unreadable. Those moments sent chills down my spine. One evening, Mai told me she planned to move in with him. "He's amazing," she gushed. "You'll see, he takes care of everything." I wanted to scream, to tell her the truth, but I couldn't, not without proof. Instead, I begged her to slow down, to think twice before making such a big decision. She laughed it off, calling me overprotective. Days later, I decided to follow them. I didn't trust myself to act directly, but maybe I could find something, anything, that would prove he was dangerous. One afternoon, I trailed behind as they drove to a small town outside the city. They stopped at a massage parlor, and I waited nervously outside, heart pounding. Hours passed before Kid reappeared, alone. No Mai, just him, looking smug as ever. My mind raced. Where was she? What had he done? That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the events in my head, wondering if I'd missed my chance to save Mai, or worse, if she was already gone. Early the next morning, I called the police, anonymously, giving them as much detail as I could about Kid. I hoped it would be enough. By midday, the news broke. A nationwide manhunt was underway for a suspected serial killer. Photos of Kid were plastered everywhere, from TV screens to billboards. Panic spread quickly, especially among families with missing loved ones. For days, the country held its breath, waiting for the nightmare to end. Meanwhile, Mai hadn't come home. Each hour felt longer than the last, each unanswered phone call heavier than the previous one. Finally, unable to bear it anymore, I went to the police station myself. With shaking hands, I handed over everything I knew. Descriptions, timelines, even the address of the house Mai had mentioned moving to. They promised to investigate immediately, but deep down, I feared it was too late. 2 days later, they found her. Or rather, they found traces of her. Her belongings were scattered across a dingy motel room, along with signs of a struggle. No body, though. Just emptiness. Kid, however, remained elusive. Despite the massive search effort, he vanished like smoke, slipping through cracks no one else could see. Months dragged on, and life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could get after something like that. But I never forgot. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, heard his voice. I swore to myself that if I ever crossed paths with him again, I wouldn't hesitate. Next time, I'd make sure justice was served. Little did I know, fate had other plans. Months turned into years and life moved on. Or at least, it pretended to. I finished school, got a job, and tried my best to forget about Kid. But how could I? Every time I saw a news report about unsolved crimes or heard someone mention serial killers, my mind went straight back to that man, the one who charmed his way into people's lives and then destroyed them. Then, in 2019, something happened that made my blood run cold. News broke that Kid had been released from prison after serving 14 years for his original murders. Apparently, he'd behaved so well behind bars that he earned royal clemency, a second chance at freedom. At first, I thought it was a joke. How could someone like him deserve another shot at life when he'd taken so many others? But there it was on the screen, his mug shot, older now, but still unmistakably him. The same smooth smile, the same calculating eyes. And just like before, he wasted no time slipping back into his old habits. One day, while scrolling through Facebook, I stumbled across a post from an old friend of mine named Ratsumi. She worked as a hotel maid and often shared updates about her life online. Recently, she'd been posting about a new boyfriend, a lawyer, she claimed, who treated her like royalty. Something about the description gave me pause. It sounded too good to be true. Curious, I clicked on her profile and scrolled through her photos. That's when I saw him. Standing next to Ratsumi, arm draped casually over her shoulder, was none other than Kid. My heart stopped. He looked older, sure, with streaks of gray in his hair, but it was definitely him. I immediately messaged Ratsumi, asking if everything was okay. Was this guy trustworthy? Did she know anything about his past? Her reply came quickly. "He's amazing. Why are you worrying?" I didn't respond right away. Instead, I called the police. They listened patiently as I explained what I'd found, though I could tell they were skeptical. After all, it had been years since anyone last heard from Kid. Why would he suddenly resurface now? But then, tragedy struck. A few weeks later, Ratsumi disappeared. Her co-workers reported her missing after she failed to show up for work 2 days in a row. When the police searched her apartment, they found signs of a struggle, and her phone, which had been used to make calls to unknown numbers shortly before she vanished. It didn't take long for investigators to connect the dots. Security footage from nearby cameras showed Kid leaving Ratsumi's building late one night, carrying a bag slung over his shoulder. Witnesses described seeing him arguing with her earlier that evening, and when they tracked down the motorcycle registered to his name, they discovered it parked outside yet another cheap motel. This time, however, Kid wasn't as careful as he used to be. When officers raided the motel room, they found evidence tying him directly to Ratsumi's murder, including her stolen belongings and traces of DNA left behind. Kid was arrested again, and this time there was no escaping justice. During the trial, prosecutors presented overwhelming proof of his guilt, not just for Ratsumi's death, but for all the others he'd committed over the years. Victims' families filled the courtroom, their faces etched with pain and anger. For the first time, Kid seemed nervous, fidgeting in his seat as witness after witness recounted the horrors he'd inflicted. In the end, the verdict was unanimous: guilty. The judge sentenced him to death, citing the sheer brutality of his crimes and the fact that he'd shown no remorse whatsoever. As he was led away in handcuffs, cameras flashed, capturing the moment for the world to see. Years later, I still think about those victims, the ones whose lives were cut short because of one man's greed and cruelty. What haunted me most was knowing that someone like Kid could exist among us, blending into society until the mask slipped and the monster underneath emerged. So here's my question for you. How do we stop people like Kid? Is it stricter laws, better education, or is it simply impossible to prevent tragedies like these? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, because if there's one thing I learned from this story, it's that evil doesn't always look the way you expect it to. Sometimes it wears a charming smile and knows exactly how to win your trust, until it's too late.